So I just realized I was muted. Guys, really sorry about that. Let me just take a few minutes just to run through. My name is Derek with PGH Networks, and welcome to Lunchbox Leaders, Cybersecurity Unfiltered. This is the first episode that we're going to have. This is going to be a 4-episode series. I wanted to remind everyone that the first 50 people that signed up for the event did get a Grubhub voucher. Do me a favor and look at your spam filter just to make sure that it's not stuck in your spam filter. So lunch is on us. PGH Networks focuses on computer and technology support solutions for local, regional, and enterprise companies. What does that mean? So we're an IT support company, and we can help businesses large or small. I'm really excited to introduce Sean Sweeney with Microsoft. Sean's the Senior Director and Chief Security Officer for Microsoft. Sean, if you could take a few minutes and give a little bit of a background and talk about what you're going to be discussing today during the event.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I would be happy to do just that. So my name is Sean Sweeney. And my role at Microsoft, I am Senior Director and Chief Security Advisor. I work in what's called Microsoft Cybersecurity Solutions Group. And our group really focuses on the end-to-end security and compliance technologies, story, messaging. Here at Microsoft, we focus external with our customers, but we also focus a lot internal. And making sure that the different engineering groups are executing on the right strategies for what our customers need, and that we're then explaining it to our customers so that way they understand how they can leverage this technology to help secure their digital transformation. My specific role and specific team within Cybersecurity Solutions Group, we are the Security Advisor team. I have the pleasure of managing a group of former CISOs and senior security professionals who operate in both North and South America, and they focus on advising both the market and our customers on our security and compliance vision, strategy, and roadmap. I mentioned that team is a team of former CISOs. I myself am a former CISO, or perhaps a recovering CISO, if you will. And so if you had met me 3 years ago, you would have met me as the CISO of the University of Pittsburgh. So I am a local guy, if you will. Prior to that, I've always been a practitioner. So prior to that, I was the CTO of a e-discovery startup, CIO of a law firm before that, and ran e-discovery for the U.S. Department of Justice litigating divisions before that. So really always kind of wear my customer lens or that customer hat when I work with customers. And I'm really excited about the topic today. I'm really excited that PGA Networks invited me here. And really what I want to talk about and what I want to focus on is securing remote work, because it's ever present in what we're going through today. So let's transition and let's talk about that. All right. So secure remote work. How did we get here? And I don't, forgive me, this may be obvious to some, but for others, kind of the insights that we have at Microsoft may prove super helpful. But let me share my desktop so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. That's how you use Teams. All right, great. So COVID, right? We've been talking with customers for years about their digital transformation and the fact that security is changing, the fact that that they need to really focus on enabling their workforce to be more agile, to be more nimble, because their workforce demands it, right? Well, lo and behold, COVID really brought that front and center for everybody. What we saw when COVID first hit, right, is this sudden spike in a need to allow remote access. Everyone that had been inside the network was now outside the network and working from home. right? So how do you account for that? How do you adapt? The other thing that just from a logistics standpoint that we saw customers going through is really scalability constraints. Our VPN architectures were not built to sustain 100% of our user populations being outside the network and relying on that VPN. Furthermore, us in security, we are going through a transition and have been for many years, and many of our programs are still very network heavy. I can remember when I started at Pitt in 2012 as CISO, 80% of the folks on my team had the word network security in their title, right? And that was indicative of the fact that for many organizations, even up until COVID hit, much of their control plane was built around the network. So as the VPN starts to fall down, so does the security framework and the security substrate that organizations were dealing with. When COVID first hit, we published a lot of information helping a lot of customers on, how do you do split tunneling as an example, and how do you secure that extra traffic or the traffic that's now split out of the normal kind of hairpin back to the on-prem network. Some other challenges that customers were seeing, over the last couple of months during COVID is the bad actors really exploiting both COVID-related systems and sites, as well as using COVID as a theme to try to get inside our enterprises, right? Combine those security issues with more traditional IT issues, which, organizations, not only do they send all their employees home, but they were also still onboarding employees. And so how do you get equipment to folks when you're used to having forgive the expression, but a butt in a seat on day one, right? How do you roll out new security controls when you want to make changes to your program when historically, a lot of our IT infrastructure relied on them connecting to CorpNet inside a corporate building to get those changes pushed to them. And then just how do we support remote work all up, right? So these are all the things, all the challenges that organizations have been going through over the last 3 months. And what I'm going to share with you is really what we've learned and what we've then been advising customers to do and to focus on. You're going to hear me talk around 3 key areas, okay? The first is enabling remote access to applications. The second is managing devices and applications. And the third is protecting corporate resources. Now, I'm going to talk in terms of a lot of Microsoft technology because that's the name on my shirt. However, a lot of these approaches could be applied in a somewhat of a technology agnostic way if need be. And in some cases, I will highlight when there's offers out there that you don't even need to own anything from Microsoft to take advantage of. But I want to make sure you really get a flavor through the lens of the secure remote work topic of how you could outfit your organization using Microsoft security technology to make all this work. So the first place that we're going to look is in terms of enabling remote access to apps. And this is all about empowering your remote workers to access the apps they need without compromising security. And that's really a paradigm shift for many in security. I remember my first months at the university, and I was up in front of a faculty senate meeting, and I stood there and then told the faculty senate that it was my role to manage security versus access, like I was Lady Justice herself, right? And then that was actually an incorrect assumption. My role was to really advise the university leadership on risk as it relates to cyber and then help them make the right decisions. But the underpinning of what I said in that meeting was that you could only have one or the other, right? And so you had to balance the two. And as you tipped one end of the scale, it tipped the other. And really what we're driving for here with this approach is to really allow for both. So what does that look like, enabling remote access to apps? Really, it's around 4 key things. Now, for the sake of time today, I'm not going to be able to focus on all 4 in super depth. But you can see those things here, right? It's about securing access to your apps from anywhere. It's about simplifying the end user app discovery process so they understand what they're authorized to get to. It's about extending secure collaboration to your contractors and partners, that business to business authentication. And it's about enabling strong authentication. So I'm going to focus on a couple of these here, again, for the sake of time. Where it really all starts is it starts with single sign-on, okay? You may have heard folks say in the past, or you'll hear me say it now, that in the cloud world and in a world where a majority of your workers are outside the four walls of your network, identity is a key perimeter to your organization. It is the superset, and the network then becomes a subset within. Whereas in security, we're used to thinking the other way around. And so having a solid single sign-on strategy is key. A, it simplifies your user experience, but B, it also provides you with greater security because A, it avoids confusion for users in terms of where they're supposed to put their credentials, but it also becomes your the front door of your identity perimeter. And so in the Microsoft world, that is enabled by Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And as organizations move to Azure Active Directory for authentication, they have a couple of different options. And so I think it's important for me to highlight these here so you somewhat can understand these architectures in that, in both cases, Microsoft AAD, Azure Active Directory, is underpinned by an Active Directory architecture or infrastructure that generally lives on-prem. And in order to connect those two services together, you really have two ways to architect it. One is what's known as pass-through authentication, and the other is what's known as password hash sync. When I say password hash sync, I think everyone on the webinar that has security in their title just had all the hair on the back of their neck raise up. I'm going to explain why that's not the end of the world in a second. But let's look at the first. And the first does exactly what it sounds like. As those attempts come in, an agent is used to basically pass them to your on-prem AD infrastructure for that authentication, and then pass back an approve or a deny, right? A thumbs up or a thumbs down from Active Directory, and then AAD can do the other things that it's designed to do that we'll talk about in a minute. Okay. The second option is password hash sync, and this is not syncing actual passwords. This is salted versions of the hashes themselves, so not even the actual hashes. What this allows is that while there is a synchronization that occurs between on-prem and Azure Active Directory, this actually allows for authentication to occur directly against Azure Active Directory. Why is that better? From a user experience, that is better because it enables things like the ability for users to take advantage of self-service password reset via cloud. We can take the help desk out of that process. Oh, glory day, right? But also from a security perspective, it severs the dependency between cloud and on-prem. Why is that good for a security perspective? Well, let's go back 2 years ago during WannaCry and NotPetya. Many organizations had their entire on-prem infrastructures bricked, okay, including Active Directory. In all of those cases, the cloud, Azure Active Directory, Office 365, any other cloud service was unaffected. But if you relied on on-prem infrastructure, pass-through authentication, to authenticate to those cloud services, then that was broken as well. So password hash sync also offers resiliency in addition to productivity. So that's just a brief overview of enabling cloud authentication. What we're actually authenticating to is everything that is running in your enterprise, okay? So, we often think of, it's Microsoft Azure Active Directory, I must be authenticating to O365. And yeah, sure, that's in the mix. But you could be using that to authenticate to any SaaS application. Single click integration with all the popular thousands of them cloud services, including our competitors, right? You can also authenticate to cloud hosted apps. both in Microsoft Azure, but also in competitor clouds. And lastly, and often overlooked, is you can authenticate to on-premise and legacy applications as well. And this is key, and because now what you have is you do have true single sign-on powered by the cloud with all the benefits of security that I'm going to talk about in a minute with the technology called conditional access to really the three primary sources of the applications in your environment that your users are authenticating to. And we can extend that on-premise authentication can be done directly via first-party technology from Microsoft with what's known as Microsoft AD App Proxy. But we can also lean on partners. So if you're, for instance, a Zscaler shop, you can lean on that as well and use that as part of that integrated strategy. So the front door still is, from an end user perspective and from an intelligence engine, is Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Okay. So that's how we're architecting authentication, what we're authenticating to. The next important step is the security that we're using during those authentications. I actually decided to dress up a little bit today, but normally on a work from home day like today, I'd probably be wearing one of my favorite shirts that I got at Microsoft that says Enable MFA across the front of it. I do wear this out. I do wear it all over the place. I am a walking billboard, not so much for Microsoft, but for multi-factor authentication, because frankly, passwords just don't cut it anymore. At Microsoft, we are working to drive them completely out of the enterprise. And in our first-party environment, our corporate environment, we've largely done that. More on that later, or even perhaps another time. But in the meantime, we need to focus on adding MFA to that authentication flow, even if you are also still using passwords. And so that can be accomplished via things like Microsoft Authenticator. That can also be accomplished via other means to verify identity, right? And so, if we were here in person, right, which I would love to be in person with all of you, you would have watched me walk in and walk up to the podium with my laptop, and you would have not ever seen me touch the keyboard. You would have seen me just look at it because I'm using Windows Hello for authentication, okay? So it's something I have, my laptop, as well as something I am, my face. Those two combined would have authenticated me to my laptop and then to services beyond that as connected through Azure Active Directory. FIDO2 security keys can be brought to bear here, as can hard and soft tokens, SMS and voice, as well as push notifications, okay? So regardless of what flavor your organization is into, we can support it here with Azure Active Directory. And but the key is that you're using multi-factor in your environment. The other key is that when you're doing authentication and when you're making decisions about whether to enforce multi-factor, you're doing so based on risk, okay? And that's really what you see here is a representation of the concept that we at Microsoft call conditional access, okay? And this quite simply is taking signal about the user and the location they're coming from, about taking signal from the device that they're coming from, and it's about looking at real-time risk related, to that user and that device, and then combining that with the application that they're trying to go to, what they're trying to access, okay? Using all these inputs, we can come up with risk levels, okay? We can also come up with hard, fast rules separate from a low, medium, and high risk level to then apply conditions to that access, okay? And those conditions can be a yes, we're gonna allow that access. Those conditions can be, we're gonna, based on risk or based on defined criteria, we're gonna require MFA. A simple version of this policy could be, I know we're talking about remote work, but prior to COVID, a good example of a policy here might be that when I see a computer on the on-prem corporate network, I'm not going to require MFA, and when I see it off, I'm automatically going to, right? Other ways that we can verify those access attempts is we can actually limit access. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later when we talk about our CASB. And then we can do the thing that many of us in security love to do. We can block access altogether. The reason why we're offering multiple options here is because historically in security, authentication was really treated like firewall requests, right? It was an approve or it was a deny, right? There was no gray space in between. And so what conditional access allows us to do is actually present the proper security controls to each authentication event based on risk, right? So when I was at Pitt, one of the last things I did, and no, it wasn't the reason I left, was turn on multi-factor for every user, for every authentication, for every application, okay? It was necessary for the risk the university was seeing at the time, and it was all that the technology that we had at the time, back in 2016 or so, could power, right? Well, now, if I were in that same role, what I could do is I could enable or require MFA when it made the most sense, right? For some organizations, that still might be via their risk tolerance every time, but for other organizations, there may be some balance that is struck there. I think it's important to understand too that we are making these decisions not just based on simple telemetry like on the network or off the network, right? I mean, it's important to be able to do that, but that's really just table stakes. We're doing a lot more than that. We are looking at, we can look at the device itself. We can understand, is that a managed device? If it is managed, is it compliant with corporate policy? Is that device under any sort of active threat in the given moment? Those are all pieces of signal that we can bring from the device and then combine with real-time risk signal about the user and the location that they're coming from, right? Is Sean Sweeney coming from the corporate network? Is Sean Sweeney coming from a known location we've seen him come from before? Is Sean Sweeney coming from a anonymous proxy or Tor exit node? Is Sean Sweeney logging in from Pittsburgh, but also logging in 3 minutes later from Scamistan, and he can't possibly fly from Pittsburgh to a fictitious location in that given travel time, right? All of those things are signal that we want to take into consideration here. And then lastly, and probably most importantly here, is what is Sean trying to do? Because if he's just trying to get to a corporate internal site that has unsensitive or non-confidential data on it, well, I'm not going to make Sean go through as much verification as I am if he's going to a site with sensitive information or if he's opening specific pieces of sensitive information on one of those sites, okay? So these are all the things that we can do with conditional access. And if you're thinking to yourself right now, well, it sounds like Sean is describing a way to enable zero trust in our environment, that is exactly what Sean is doing, okay? And so we can look at all of this through a zero trust lens. Because remember, zero trust isn't a box you buy. Zero trust is an approach to security, and conditional access is really kind of that connective tissue from Microsoft, and is therefore key to this strategy we have of enabling remote access to your apps in your environment. All right. So the next thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about managing devices and apps in your environment. All right. Again, my last role, I was at Pitt, and I always say that, universities were BYOD before BYOD was cool, right? But many of your organizations, whether before COVID or especially now during COVID, are grappling with, getting devices to users, allowing access to users that maybe they had a workstation in their office and they don't have that at home, right? And so how are we going to keep them working and keep them productive, and then manage that device and manage the risk associated with that device against those users that are working from home from corporate managed assets, right? And then how do we extend that strategy from kind of the workstation world to this world, right? To the mobile device world. So let's really focus on that here for a little bit of time. And so, the key things that this strategy requires is managing remote and personal corporate devices and applications at the highest level, okay? The other thing that this strategy requires, and what we enable at Microsoft, is remotely provisioning and deploying new devices, okay? New corporate devices, and remotely provisioning and deploying those. We can also enable the ability to deploy and manage virtual desktops. So if you work in a highly regulated environment, you can push that virtual desktop, the technology there is known as Windows virtual desktops, to your user base. And so that way they can essentially use that as a secure workstation from whatever device they need to start from. Securing mobile devices and applications, because both during COVID times and beyond, this is something that users have demanded. I think the key thing to remember here as we're talking through this conversation is it really brings up the point of, I think of users and users when they're doing their work, they're like water. They're going to follow the path of least resistance to get their job done, okay? And if you, corporate IT, if you, security organization, provide a way for them to keep their productivity and do it securely, they will follow that path. If you don't, they will find another path to get their job done. And it doesn't make them bad employees. It makes them just want to get their job done. And so you always have to be aware of that as you're crafting your policies and your strategies. And the last thing here, from a managed device and applications perspective, is really focusing on how do you proactively manage updates, patching, and policy for those devices, again, in this remote world where they live not on your network, okay? So again, I won't have time to focus on all of these, but let's just touch on a few key points here across these themes in managing devices and apps. And the first is management of endpoints. And when I talk about endpoints here, I do mean the gamut, right? I do mean everything from servers and PCs and on the domain, traditional domain. I mean devices that may be cloud joined, and I mean devices that may be mobile, whether they be of a Microsoft. Does anyone really have a Windows phone anymore, though? Or most likely an iOS and an Android variety, okay? And then I also mean Windows 10. Which can be co-managed. So in security and in IT, we're used to thinking of SCCM, right? And config manager, right? Which is what that, system center configuration manager, SCCM. And that is still part of our strategy. But our strategy also includes Intune, which is our mobile device and mobile application management technology. And we now live in a world, what we call the co-management world, okay? Where we can use both of these technologies to manage devices, to push software to devices, to manage updates if need be, and to manage policy, right? And we can now do so from Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is a unified admin console. So not going to go into a ton of detail here any more than what I just said, but SCCM is and has been the leader in endpoint management for so long that Gartner gave up rating that category, right, in the Magic Quadrant. But now we can combine that with Intune and Microsoft Endpoint Manager to really make that process much more seamless from a unified management and an IT management perspective. All right. So that's really step number one and thing number one I want you to know and understand. The second thing I want you to know and understand is how we do things at Microsoft, and so how you could be doing things at home. And that is using the ability to do zero-touch provisioning, okay? You can do this with Microsoft Surface devices, but you can also do this with OEM devices and using technology known as Autopilot and zero-touch deployment. The way it works, I'll just explain how it works when I get onboard a new person on my team. And I just did this in the middle of COVID. I hired a new security advisor based in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and he was shipped hardware from our hardware vendor. The hardware is made by Microsoft, but we use a vendor to manage we actually have to buy it from ourselves. So that was done. That device ID was fed into Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So when my new employee, Marcello, got his device, he unboxed it, he provided it with an internet connection, and fired that machine up. And when he did, he was prompted for his credentials. And once those were input, and again, those credentials hadn't been preloaded onto the machine went out and reached out via Endpoint Manager, validated those credentials, and then started to pull down and enable the image via autopilot on his device, okay? So Microsoft IT, other than doing provisioning on the Endpoint Manager side of things, and having that technology set up and enabled, and enabling his Azure Active Directory account, didn't have to do any image loading on the device ahead of time. There was none of that delay between the manufacturer and IT and the end user. Okay, and so using this process can really speed up the ability to deliver devices directly to employees, where the employee unboxes it and self-deploys, right? When that seal was cracked on that Surface device that Marcello got, it was the first time that seal had ever been cracked, all right? And then he was able to go through that self-deployment process and get to work. He was able to do that work on a Surface, you know, beyond being kind of cool and powerful devices. I'm talking to you right now from a Surface Studio. I have sitting next to me a Surface laptop, and next to that a Surface book. I might go a little crazy over here, and I do work for Microsoft, so I guess it's understandable. But Surface we've built to be secure really from the ground up. You know, creating our own UEFI, to make sure that we could say it's the most secure, really out of the box, even before you layer in our operating system and our cloud technology. So just, you know, it is something to consider. But again, everything I'm talking about today from a software, technology, cloud perspective is not relying on Surface in any way, right? That's a way you can go, but it is not required. But I think it is important to understand, just beyond a form factor, cool factor, hardware performance factor, there are security implications from a benefit perspective when it comes to Surface as well. So let's talk about device management. Let's talk about in terms of mobile devices, okay? So let's talk about guys like these, right? My iPhone. And this is my personal iPhone, and this is what I also use for my Microsoft work. Now, in security, we know we could go a couple of different ways with management or with BYO, okay? We could put our heads in the sand and just kind of allow it, or we could put our heads in the sand and just not allow it, right? Both are perilous approaches. An approach a lot of organizations take is they will focus on mobile device management. And we can absolutely enable that via Endpoint Manager, and the actual technology there is Intune, okay? This is a traditional approach of enrolling the device. This can be done self-service and can be done on the fly. So when Marcello, I'll pick on him as an example because he's not on this call, when he logged in for the first time or tried to access his email for the first time from his mobile device, he would have been taken to a prompt to enroll in mobile device management via Intune, right? Conditional access would have kicked that off and would have walked him through that process. And this is the standard approach where we're managing the whole device. For some organizations, they choose not to go that way. It is a heavy footprint on the device. You are managing not just the corporate materials, but you as an organization are making the choice and taking on the potential legal risk of managing the non-corporate assets on the device. Put in more layman's terms, those are all the pictures of kids and kittens that live on those devices, right? And so if you make a wipe or you make some sort of lock action to that device, you're locking your users not just out of their corporate materials, you're locking them out of their personal materials. That may be okay as part of your corporate policy. That may be the right thing to do if you're providing those devices, right? If it's a corporate device, why wouldn't you manage the whole darn thing? But what if it's that BYO device and you either don't want to manage the whole device, or you have a user population? So when I was at the university, our faculty in the medical schools, dental medicine and School of Medicine, as well as some of the other medical bioscience related research departments, were often faculty at the university and staff or clinicians at UPMC. And mobile device management is kind of like the Highlander. If anyone remembers that movie, there can only be one, right? When it comes to that true source of device management. And so enter the concept for that scenario, and for the scenario where you just don't want to manage the whole device, mobile application management, okay? This is something that we can push to users without having to enroll their entire device. And we can actually push to users without them even realizing that we're doing it. Because what we're doing here is, by the application, establishing management policies. So you, as an IT administrator or security administrator in your environment, are actually just setting up Intune mobile application management policies, okay, to say that for this application and corporate data, I want you to set the following policies. So let's use Outlook as an example. For Outlook, the app that an end user, just download from the Apple Store, could be the same from the Google Store, Google Play Store. When I download that app and I go to authenticate to Outlook, and I enter my Microsoft credentials, Outlook's going to communicate back with via Azure Active Directory, and is going to see that there's an Intune mobile application management policy in place, and is going to apply that policy to my corporate identity within that application. But only my corporate identity within that application, because I happen to use Outlook for my corporate email, but I use it for my personal email as well. And that MAM policy does not impact or touch my personal data inside that application. The same is true for the full Office suite of applications. This technology is also available in third-party applications. We have an SDK that developers can integrate with, and you can also wrap applications in so that way they can be subject to MAM policies as well. All right. So this is a really pretty cool way of kind of having your cake and eat it too. You can enforce things like, for example, on my device, if an email is marked as sensitive, I can't copy and paste out of my corporate identity to my personal identity inside Outlook or in any other app, text message, what have you, on my device, right? So you can set policies like that. You can also enforce things like PINs, non-jailbroken phones, and the likes, policies that are traditionally seen as mobile device management policies can be enforced here to a certain extent as well. So this really becomes key in our ability to provide for that security and productivity equation. All right. So that rounds out the key points I wanted to cover in managing devices and applications. And so the last thing I want to spend about the next 7 minutes on is talking about protecting corporate resources. Okay, and the idea here is that we want to leverage built-in seamless security to protect data while keeping our users productive. Okay. Built-in and seamless are really key words here. One of the things that I've seen pre-COVID, and I'm definitely seeing COVID accelerate, is kind of the shift away in the industry from this single tool for every problem approach, because that's a real bolted-on approach. It's expensive, it's complicated to manage. And in a remote world where then each of those tools have to be managed individually, it adds a layer of complication. And I see folks moving toward the more built-in security approach, integrated security approach, which is obviously something Microsoft specializes in, has been focusing on for the last 3+ years as we built out our security and compliance portfolios. So the key themes here to focus on are protecting data while your remote workers collaborate, because remember, there's a ton of collaboration going on. Unfortunately, it might be 12 hours a day and back-to-back meeting collaboration that's going on. That can be problematic for your workers. That's a whole nother topic and a whole nother subject around work-life balance in this COVID world. But but they're doing a lot of collaboration, and we need to make sure that our security policies still apply there. We also need to make sure that we're securing our data in cloud applications, that we're keeping our people safe from all the old attacks and all the new attacks, and that we're keeping our endpoints secure, because these endpoints now live outside of our traditional network-based defenses, okay? So let's look at that collaboration, and I'm going to focus on Teams. That's what we're on right now. And Teams is our collaboration platform for chat, for video, for live webinar meetings like we're on now, for document sharing. It's becoming the one-stop shop for many organizations, and it's important that when it lives in that role, that it honors and enables the security and privacy needs of an organization. Okay, and so what you're able to do in Teams is apply classification and DLP policies directly that apply to Teams. Okay, and apply to documents that are shared via Teams, but also chat that occurs in Teams. And you can kind of see a screenshot here of a well-meaning user sharing credit card information over a Teams chat, and having that message blocked and being provided with a policy tip on why that was the worst thing that user could have done today, right? And so it's a huge benefit to Microsoft Teams, and our approach with all of our collaboration and productivity platform is to make sure that security and privacy controls are built right in to the platform itself, and so that you don't have to bolt on or add on additional tools. When it comes to data itself, we provide for DLP in our cloud platforms. We provide for are now providing for DLP beyond, and we also rely heavily on a strategy of data classification using labels, and that classification can be driven automatically because, let's face it, users really kind of stink at data classification because it's not their job. And so using the intelligence of the platform and using the visibility of the platform to really streamline information protection via intelligent data classification and then dynamic protection actions. What do I mean by that? If I have a document that I'm working on my desktop here, and it's got sensitive information in it, it's therefore classified as having sensitive information in it, it's going to have policies that can follow that document. Perhaps that policy is going to be to apply a rights management list to it and encrypt the document. So that way, if the document leaves my desktop and goes somewhere to Derek's email, that's okay, because unless Derek has the access to the authentication access to open that document, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros in the wrong order, right? We can do other dynamic actions like making sure that never lives on cloud platforms or specific cloud platforms or specific sites within. There's a lot of granularity that we can do there, but it really starts with that data classification, and we can invoke that in lots of ways, and we can do that with both the cloud and an on-prem focus. So that's super important to protecting your data wherever it lives and wherever it goes. Cloud application management, specifically discovery via CASB. CASB is Cloud Application Security Broker. It's a security space as defined by Gartner. We have a tool in this space called Cloud App Security. So giving you the ability to discover, assess the risks of, and manage all your cloud applications, whether they be IaaS or PaaS or SaaS, is key. CASB, we tend to think mostly in terms of SaaS, but IaaS and PaaS, we can take a view on that as well and really aggregate that information into a single console. What you're seeing here is a view of discovery, but CASB is also a control plane both for threat protection as well as information protection. And let me give you an example of what that can look like. Let's say I'm a user and I'm trying to get to an application, right? Remember I talked about conditional access, evaluating risk? Well, let's say conditional access takes a look at me as I'm trying to log into this log into this site, right? And it's going to see that I'm coming from an unmanaged device. That is going to elevate my risk. And in many environments, security might say that's a no-go. What we can actually do here, though, is say, hey, we're going to enable you on managed device to get to that application, but we're going to invoke a proxy via our cloud app security tool, okay? This is an on-demand risk-based proxy, so that way we can control that given session because the user is coming from an unmanaged device. So we're going to allow them to view and work with that document, but we're going to block any downloads local, right? What a cool use case that through a combination of Azure Active Directory and Cloud App Security, we can enable, right? And if you're using Azure Information Protection, we can even enable that all the way down to a document level. So some pretty neat stuff there. Your endpoints and your users need to be protected from phishing and malware attacks. We have technology that does that. It's known as Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, focusing not just on that email channel from a malicious link detection as well as a malicious file detection, but also we extend that technology across SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and the Office applications directly on the desktop. So if a user clicks on a malicious link embedded in a Word document that they're just opening up locally, they can be protected as well. Okay, so this is beyond just that email gateway protection that you're used to thinking about. And speaking of COVID and phishing attacks, at the bottom there's a URL there, aka.ms/MSFT-COVID-19-MISP. That is where you can get access to an open source threat intelligence feed provided by Microsoft, specifically related to COVID-19 phishing related TTPs, okay? No Microsoft technology required. If you're using Microsoft technology, you've already got that feed incorporated, but for those of you that aren't, here you go. And the last piece that I want to talk about protecting corporate resources is the endpoints, okay? We do this at Microsoft using Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. This incorporates both traditional AV, which is built into the OS. It also incorporates management of other things that are built into Windows 10, endpoint, not just endpoint protection, but endpoint control and account and guard. And adds EDR, threat and vulnerability management, and auto investigation remediation capabilities. The cool thing here is despite the name, Microsoft, this applies to Apple and is expanding to apply to Linux as well. And this also technology extends to mobile devices of the two major flavors, Android and iOS. What we do here, by the way, from a roadmap perspective, is we build for Windows first, and then we scale to those other platforms. So we'll roll out a new technology, threat and vulnerability management, as an example, scale that to Windows, and then roll that to the other platforms. But the idea here is to give you the ability to give you best-in-class protection for your endpoint fleet. And if you don't want to just believe what I have to say about it, you can take a look at what Gartner has to say about it and see where they rate us in the top right from a Magic Quadrant perspective. But again, the idea here is this is the Microsoft use case, but you need to be focusing on better endpoint protections when all of your endpoints are off the network. All right. So that really rounds out the key topics I wanted to make sure I hit about the things that you need to focus on for securing your remote workforce. And those things are, enabling remote access to your application so that way your users can get to what they need to get to securely, but also quickly. Enabling the management of devices and applications when they live both on and off your network, because this is the world we live in now. Many of our employees may not be coming back to that corporate office. And then lastly is a strategy to protect those corporate resources, which includes endpoints, but also includes the data and the cloud applications that our users interact with. So I hope you found this useful. I am going to pause here, and we are actually going to open this up in the time we have remaining for any questions that might have come up during the presentation.
So Sean, that was really fantastic. That really got down into a lot of detail around, what it takes in today's age to really to ensure that your devices and your applications are secure. So in your mind, how difficult is it to license all of these applications and really make sure that you have all these tools that you're talking about through Microsoft? How many different licenses do they need in order to make sure that this stuff is all functioning appropriately?
That's a great question. So I'm gonna address it in kind of 2 points. One is kind of the licensing end, and two is the deployment. How easy is it for us to kind of get this done? From a licensing perspective, all the different technologies I talked about could be licensed individually, but what a majority of our customers do is they license them through. We have what we have known as the M365 security bundle. That basically brings all these technologies together. They can also be licensed in Microsoft 365, which you'll hear in the industry sometimes as E5. And essentially, it's a all-up, one-stop shop per user licensing that includes your Windows licensing, includes your O365 licensing, includes your Teams and Power, Cloud PBX, and all the security and all the compliance offerings that Microsoft makes available. And that is really kind of the end all and be all. And so, we really have sizes or models that fit every organization. Okay, I've got the license. Thanks for that, Sean. What now? How hard is this to do? It's certainly not necessarily isn't an overnight approach. We help customers with taking a low effort, high impact assessment of these technologies. And so oftentimes it's starting with identity, focusing on endpoints as well, and focusing on that cloud app discovery and cloud app management. All of those things in tandem. Identity is really the underpinning and the first thing, and it can be set up fairly quickly. And then those other two devices and cloud apps can be done in tandem, and can be done by and large without having to touch all of our endpoints. Because one of the great things, our strategy around Defender ATP on the endpoint, if you're using a Windows 10 fleet of computers, you already have the code for Defender built right in. So all we're actually doing is activating and communicating with those endpoints. We're not pushing any new code down. So it makes that installation pretty seamless.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really fantastic. I mean, at PGH, we've been using the Office 365 and also the Microsoft 365 security bundles for a while now with our clients. So from your perspective, what do you consider low-hanging fruit from a security perspective? I had someone ask, what is the most important factor in managing cybersecurity risk when all your employees are working remotely? It seems like kind of a loaded question based on everything that you talked about, but I'd love to get your insight on that.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and not pick just one, but I'll limit it to, let's say, three. Number one of those three is going to be ensuring that your users, you have a identity-based perimeter strategy in place, because the network topology, the network infrastructure is not going to scale to this COVID world for most organizations. So that would be the number one thing I would do to address risk. The number two thing that I would do to address risk is how are you managing the cloud applications that the users are getting to, especially since your organization may be rapidly onboarding new cloud applications in order to enable the productivity of workers. And in cloud, configuration management is vulnerability management. Okay, if you misconfigure a cloud service, you are opening the door for bad actors in that cloud service. Okay, and so getting your arms around the configuration of your cloud service, it's hygiene, right? Is a key risk, and thing number two I would focus on. And then thing number three is those devices. Getting tight management or at least visibility around the endpoint device fleet, because you're not going to be able to rely on signal from your network anymore. You got to rely on signal directly from those endpoints.
You can't manage what you don't know, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, that was honestly, it was fantastic. We're running out of time here, so I would like to really take a few minutes and just thank you for taking the time out to really talk about enabling a secure remote workforce. I think all of your points were extremely valid. So thank you so much, Sean. I also wanted to throw out a few thank yous to some additional people that have really spent a lot of time putting this all together for us today. So thank you to Nicole Murtha over here at PGH Networks. She's behind the scenes producing this. If it wasn't for this knucklehead, I wouldn't have known I was on mute. So sorry about that to everyone. And then I would like to thank the Spark Designs team, Nick Brucker's team at Spark Design, specifically Mackenzie Kleinvex and Liz Venanzi and Chad Parise. They have done a great job really putting this together. Love the whole Netflix theme around the Lunchbox Leaders. Thanks for everyone else at PGH Networks for letting us put this on. So really, really, really happy about all this. I think it, a couple hiccups, but it went pretty well. So the best part about today is actually, I didn't really get to mention that in the beginning of this, but we're actually going to be doing a giveaway. So we are going to be giving away a set of Microsoft Surface earbuds. So that's pretty exciting. As you guys, I don't know if you guys noticed, but Sean is actually wearing a set of the earbuds as he was doing the presentation today. So we are actually switching to the Wheel of Names. So let's see who the winner is. And we have Sita Tieber. Thank you so much, Sita. Congratulations for winning the Microsoft earbuds. We will be reaching out to get your shipping information, and we will be sending that out those earbuds to you. Really, congratulations, and thank you so much for attending. The one thing I did want to mention to you guys, make sure you join us for episode 2 of Lunchbox Leaders coming out July 23rd. We are going to have ID agent Matt Solomon, and he's going to be talking about digital risk, protecting your most important asset. So it's going to be another nice, exciting event. So hope to hear from you soon. Please tune in. See you guys.